Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jay, and today what I have for you is the Yongnuo 11mm f1.8 lens. Now, this is an ultra wide angle lens with a fast f1.8 aperture, and it's made for Sony E-mount APS-C cameras at the time of this review. So I'm going to be using my Sony a6700 to test out this beast, and what I want to start this video off with is showing you what it can do in the real world. Also, just to let you know, Yongnuo did send this lens to me, but there's been no money exchange. They have no feedback on the review or anything like that, but they did provide me with the lens, just to let you guys know. Want to be transparent here, but it has no influence whatsoever on what I say in the review. It's all my opinions. All right guys, I'm at Port Jervis Watershed today, and this is like the coolest spot I have near me for downhill trail. Awesome for filming mountain biking on the trails, just as an example, for a wide angle lens. And then I also went to this amazing place. It's like a huge garden type place, and I tried to do a little bit more cinematic type footage on that scenario using a gimbal. And then we'll get into some sample photos as well as lab testing and stuff like that, where I tested the autofocus system and all the other stuff that I normally do. Lens is crazy wide. Alright guys, sorry about the crappy audio quality, but I just wanted to show you really quick what 11mm looks like at f1.8 with just regular stabilization on. So I'm going to put it on active stabilization in a second, and you'll see it crops in a little bit, but you can see at arm's length just how much, you know, you can see in the background. This wide angle really offers tremendous amount of background, you know, scenery, let's say. So very cinematic look for that wide angle view. Let me put on active stab so you can see the difference. Okay, now I'm recording with active stabilization, so it's cropped in a little bit tighter, but the stabilization should be significantly better when hand holding like I'm doing right now. So you tell me, how much better is it? Still see you get quite a bit of a wide angle view here. See the buildings in the background and stuff are looking pretty small. It's pretty nice. Also at f1.8 should be getting some decent background separation there, even though it's so wide. At 11mm it's going to look fairly detailed back there, but if you look closely you should see some blur there for sure. I'm only about 8 feet away from Jace, so I'm very close. And it looks like he's like 15-20 feet away. Whoa, big jumps! Alright guys, so here we are in the studio, and as you can see, the lens is right here in front of me. So I'm touching the front of the lens, it's very close. So if I show you the perspective distortion here at my fingers, you could see how they're getting that stretch effect when it goes to the corners, and that's what helps make the wide angle view look so wide. And it really helps with landscapes and stuff. Now, if you want to look at some lens flaring here, let's show you that real quick. So you can see you do get that weird flaring coming off the side there. It's interesting. But otherwise, it's fairly well controlled. So I just noticed some interesting flaring here inside my house as I was preparing to go outside. So you could see what that looks like in the real world. Alright, so now I'm at f16. I just wanted to show you the star flaring you can get with this, and it looks really awesome. 7-blade rounded aperture yields you really cool star flare effects, as you can see here. Very nice. Now this is at ISO 4000, by the way. Let me put it back to f1.8. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when I shut the light off. And right now I still have a lamp on in the corner over here. So I'll shut that lamp off in a second, but it is pretty dark in the room. It's a little bit darker than it looks in the image, I would say. So right now, f1.8, I'm at ISO 1000. So in this lighting environment, ISO 1000 is still required. So it is still fairly dark, low light situation. But you can see it looks really good. And ISO 1000 is totally within range on this camera to look nice and clean. So let me shut the lamp off. All right, so now it's really dark in here. And let's see what it looks like. So now we're at ISO 5000, ISO 6400. All right, guys, so I shut off facial recognition. So this way, when I hold something up in front of the lens, it should just focus on it immediately. As you can see here. You can see there's a little bit of focus breathing there, but not too much. Now there's quite a bit of focus breathing. But you can see the focus is nice and quiet, very smooth. I have the focus transition speed set to 3. So this lens features a manual aperture ring, which is quite nice for those that like using manual aperture rings. And it has an on and off click for the aperture ring, which again is really nice. You can leave it on if you're using it for photography, and you'll get that little bit of the clicking feedback. All right, so I just wanted to show you an aperture throw here. So this is with the aperture declicked, so it'll be nice and smooth, and we're at f1.8. So I'm just going to select the quarter, so it's tracking that, and then I'm going to slowly go through the aperture range here. Here's f4, f5, f8, f11, all the way to f16. Now if I go back all the way to f1.8, and now if you do it quickly, that's what it looks like when you do it quickly. It still goes pretty slow, actually. In addition to that, we have an autofocus manual focus switch. This switch doubles as the remote control, enable and disable. So this lens comes with an optional remote control that you can use, and depending on if you're using it or not, that switch will either be that or autofocus manual focus. In addition, this lens also has a focus hold button, or a customizable function button, which by default will be focus hold, which is very nice. Now, the focus ring is very easy to turn and it's very smooth. There's not much dampening feedback to it, but it is very smooth and easy to turn. It's got a nice pedal style lens hood here, and now we got a pinch style lens cap, as well, which I always like. Now we're looking at a 58mm filter thread on the front of this guy. And looking at it on the back, we do have a nice weather sealed rubber gasket, which is quite nice. Now we also have a USB port here for firmware updates as well. So quite a bit of options on this lens. Now the lens is made of metal, so it actually feels like pretty beefy and pretty heavy. Even though it's small and lightweight, it's not crazy heavy, but it feels like it has good build quality weight to it. You know what I'm saying? So let me show you what it looks like mounted up to the A6700 quick. Just got to line up the dot, bolt that on there like so, and throw the lens hood on like that. And as far as the price goes, it goes for about $300. Right now it's on sale for about $260 US. So here's what it looks like mounted up to the Sony A6700. And you can see it looks really nice. It's not too big, and you know, get the job done. Fairly lightweight package overall. And just at a comparison here, I just wanted to show you what it looks like next to the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 lens. Now the Viltrox is definitely significantly more money, but it's f1.4 max aperture, which will give you a much more blurry background. It looks more like, it's like more of a full frame look, I would say, you can get with f1.4 as opposed to f1.8, but it's not quite as wide. So we're looking at about a 20mm effective on the Viltrox lens. It's got a manual aperture similar to this, but that is about it as far as the buttons and features go. So I have a full review of the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 lens if you guys want to see what this lens can do. It's an amazing lens as well. Now guys, when compared to the Sony 11mm f1.8 lens, that lens is lighter weight. It has less features, like as far as manual aperture ring and stuff, and it goes for about $550. So $550 versus $260 is kind of what we're looking at here. And this lens actually has more physical features like the manual aperture ring and the click declick switch, for example. The Sony lens doesn't have that, but the Sony lens does offer dual linear focus motors, so it is going to be better for high-speed moving subjects. Again, if you're tracking, you know, skateboarding, things like that, whatever, close range, high-speed moving subjects, the Sony lens is going to be better for tracking, especially when it comes to video, just so you guys are aware. But that lens is quite a bit more money, and it's definitely like built more, like a little bit cheaper, like it's all plastic and stuff like that compared to this lens, but it does have less barrel distortion compared to this lens. In addition, the Sony lens has a better minimum focus distance, so it'll give you a little bit more magnification if you want to get like really close to flowers and stuff like that. All right, so I'm tracking the quarter. I have the focus transition speed set to 3. Okay, it lost it right there to the minimum focus distance. So now I'm back on the quarter. All right, now I have the focus transition speed set to 6 as opposed to 3, so it should be much more responsive, like faster. This is with the focus transition speed set to 6. You can see it works pretty darn good. To the dollar bill, to the quarter, and I'll go all the way to the background again so you can see the focus breathing. Back to the quarter. Alright, so I just put the focus transition speed to 1, and I want to show you what it looks like when set to the speed of 1. That's all the way to the background. Now I'm going to go back to the quarter. You can see it takes a couple of seconds, but it's nice and smooth, works really well. Now I'm going to go from the quarter to the dollar bill. There you have it. Back to the quarter. And again, that's with the focus transition speed set to 1. So that's the slowest it can go, and you can see it's nice and smooth. All right, guys, let's go over some sample photos quick, and then we will wrap this review up. So starting off with the basic lab testing here, I was about 3 feet away from the lab scene, so you can see just how much of the lab scene you can see because of the ultra wide angle nature of this lens. So here at f1.8, you can see on the top left here is the EXIF data. I was using a self timer and a tripod, of course. And you can see here at f1.8, the corner sharpness is looking very good, and fringing is pretty well controlled. I don't really see any fringing. Now, in some of the real world shots, I did see fringing, and I'll show you guys that in a minute. But in this lab testing, it's looking really good. And you can see here on the metal, even if I go to 200%, you can see it's very well controlled. Like, I'm not seeing any purple or green or anything like that. So again, I'm just very impressed. I did not expect this lens to perform this well in the lab testing. I thought for sure it was going to have a lot more fringing, because I did see some fringing in the real world. Now, there is some significant distortion. I'll show you that in a minute. I have another real world shot where you can see it a little bit, but if you look at the verticals on the lab scene, if I hit the crop tool and go to turn, you could see how the curvature is, you know? So when it comes to horizontal and vertical lines, you will definitely see it, but in the real world, you don't really notice it. So if we stop down to f2.8, you can see, again, the sharpness is very good, pretty much corner to corner. You know, just, it's not razor blade sharp in the corner here on the chips, but it's very sharp, and I would say acceptably sharp. Now here is f4. Here's f5.6. I'll just stay zoomed in here. Here's f8, f11, and f16. You can see f16 does soften up a little bit due to the diffraction there. All right, guys, so looking at the minimum focus distance, it's about 5.5 inches or so, or 15 centimeters. And you can see the background blur looks excellent. And that's what you can get with a fast aperture lens like this. And because it's wide angle, you can actually see quite a bit of the background, and it's blurry. So that's pretty cool. So I focused here on the bottom of the quarter. The quarter was at a slight angle in relation to the camera, so the top here is going to look a little bit soft. I'm sorry about that. I didn't have it perfectly, you know, on the same focal plane as the lens. But that's what you can get at f1.8. And you can see the bokeh balls look excellent. You can see it's nice and round. And again, the fringing control is very, very good. Better than expected. Significantly better than expected, I would say. Now, if we stop her down to f2.8, you can see that background detail start to come in. Here's f4, here's f5.6, and here's f8. Now, if I zoom in, I just want to give you a closer look at the quarter and the bokeh balls here, bokeh balls. And you can see 7 blades there. That's what it looks like as we stop down. So it does square up a little bit. So at f1.8 here, you can see they're nice and round, but at f2.8, you can see they do square off quite a bit. Even though they are rounded, it's just a little bit harsh there on the bokeh ball. So, all right, so one last thing I wanted to show you is this is what it looks like in crop factor mode on a full frame camera. So I was using my A7C II, and this is what it looks like. Now in full frame mode, this is what it looks like. So you can see that heavy vignetting coming in because it's not designed for a full frame lens, but you can get quite a bit of a wider view if you have it in full frame mode, as you can see compared to the crop factor mode here. All right, so one other thing I wanted to show you was the vignetting here on these lab test photos. So at f1.8, if you look at the corner up here, you could see how it like brightens up. You see how it brightens up? You could really notice it on the bottom as well. And it doesn't really get much brighter than that. So that's pretty much what we're looking at with the vignette. And it is noticeably worse at f1.8. All right, guys, let's move on to some real world photos. And let me show you what this lens can do. Now, again, because it's so wide, basically it makes the subjects look smaller. So for example, here's this awesome Jeep. I was actually about 8 feet away from the Jeep. It looks like I'm like 20 feet away, but it's because of the wide angle lens. It's so awesome. It makes everything look smaller and everything look more vast. Really great for shots like this where you want to show the house, the car, the street, and so forth. And here's just another one walking around. And you can see here, looking pretty good. If I zoom in, it's very, very sharp. Now, let's see up here, you could see the fringing. You see how this fringing is pretty noticeable on the church? And I was surprised that I didn't see this in the lab testing, but you can see it here on the steeple of the church. That fringing's pretty darn noticeable. Now, here's another one. Just, again, this is just a single lane road with parking on both sides, but it almost looks like a 4-lane road because just the wide angle effect. Everything looks so much more big and vast and distant. Here's another one, building to the right. And again, just incredibly wide angle lens considering how close I was to this building. And I was able to get the whole thing, including the flagpole and stuff. Here's another one of that other building from the side. And you can see here, even with that distortion, it's fairly well controlled. Now here's another one. You can see a little bit more distortion in this shot. And here's just one at an angle here. I thought this sculpture was pretty cool. Now getting close here, I just got pretty darn close to the subject and focused on this wrought iron here. So you can see the background butter you can get with a fast aperture wide angle lens like this. And here's just another one at an angle here. And here's just another one, so you can see that depth of field fall off. I focused on this guy. It's a little further away from the camera, so it's not as blurry as the previous image. Here's just another street shot. This was the building we were looking at before, just from a different perspective across the street here with a car in the foreground. You can see the back of the car and the wheel is being stretched just that little bit. You could tell because just the size of the wheel. You know, you could see that a little bit of distortion. There is a little bit of fringing here on the wheel as well. But overall, I would say well controlled. Just another shot of that cool stone church. Now here's one I stopped down to f/16 because I wanted to show you the, sun flare, star flaring you can get. And just pretty average shot here. Just another one showing you a little bit of the park. Here's another one with the bench incorporated in the foreground here. This would be a nice shot if, there was like a couple posing on the bench or something like that. Now, here's another one looking down the street, and if you look at this white post, you can see there's quite a bit of fringing there, and you can actually see it on this flagpole as well. This was at f/8. So even at f/8, there is some fringing just depending on the scene. Now, this is easily correctable in Lightroom. Again, I'm just shocked that I didn't see that in the lab testing, so very important to do real-world testing as well, obviously. Now here's just another one showing you a little bit of layering. We got foreground, midground, background, so forth. This was at f/10 and it's looking pretty good. Just another street shot, had the camera a little bit lower here. Now here's one of my mountain bike. Now this is a great lens, like you saw that mountain bike footage earlier. So I wanted to make a thumbnail for one of my mountain bike videos on my mountain bike channel, and about 10 feet away from the bike, it makes the bike look so small and gives me all this brick to look at. So you can see here that the distortion is fairly noticeable, but then once we do a little bit of editing and correction, you can get a nice thumbnail photo like this. And here's a square one that I used for Instagram, just cropped it as a square. Here's just another one with no text, just so you can see what it looks like. Now here I just wanted to show you some close-up photography of this little flower plant weed thing, and you can see the background blur is quite good at f/1.8. And here's just another one I focused on the plant in the background this time. And here's one I stopped down to f/5, so now you can see there's much more detail on the flower, but the background isn't quite as blurry. You can see here f/1.8 versus f/5. Now here's one near the ski slope where I live, and they just parked this cool snowcat up top, and I just thought it was a pretty cool shot. So here's a better example of the distortion here, and you can kind of see how it like bows up here in the middle, and on the edges it also kind of pulls upward, and it's fairly noticeable. Now here's one as close to this flower as I could pretty much get, and you can see it looks excellent. This is at f/4. Really nice, got some nice background blur as well. All right guys, so for a couple landscape shots, these are HDRs, so multiple exposures combined. And again, this place is awesome for testing wide angle lenses, so you can see just how much of the scene is incorporated in this shot. Now this looks very good in my opinion, great wide angle lens performance. This is actually a panorama, so I had a shot in the bottom and a shot on the top, which ended up making a square. So it's going to be higher resolution if I zoom in because it's actually two shots combined. So that's what that one is. Now this one is a panoramic. I basically just took a photo looking this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. And here is the combined result. So the road was behind me. And if I zoom in here, you can see just how much resolution there is. You can see the sharpness is excellent, clarity, and so forth. When I zoom out, I can zoom back in over here, and pan over here, and you can just see all the detail. Very, very good. Cool lens for doing panoramic photography, in my opinion. And here's just one more that I took on the way out. The 11mm Yongnuo lens, and I'm really not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I gotta say, guys, at the end of the day, I'm very impressed with this lens. For approximately $260 US, you're getting incredible performance for crop factor cameras like the Sony a6700. In particular, I was very impressed with the autofocus abilities and how it was able to keep up when I was moving that quarter in and out when recording video. That's very impressive, and most lenses that I've tested can't really do that very well, except for the Sony lenses that have the really fast, you know, dual linear focus motors and stuff like that. This lens did a really good job, though, at the minimum focus distance, which is especially difficult. Now, as far as photography goes, again, very good performer overall. There was some fringing that was noticeable in the real world photos, not so much in the lab testing, which was kind of surprising. But overall, very good quality, I would say, at the end of the day, especially when you factor in the cost of this lens. Now, the distortion is pretty noticeable. You can kind of correct it a little bit in Lightroom and stuff, but it's kind of hard to correct because it kind of has like a shape to it. So as far as hardcore architecture type stuff, this is not going to be the best option. You're going to want more of a rectilinear style lens, which it has more, you know, perfectly straight lines, let's say. It does stretch and stuff in the corners, but the distortion is more well controlled. And the Sony lens, for example, does have better control in that regard based on my testing, but that lens is like $550, so it's quite a bit more. The Viltrox that I talked about, the 13mm f1.4, is another very good option in my opinion. Again, that lens is much larger, much heavier, and it cost about $200 more than this lens, but it's still cheaper than the Sony lens if you don't need as wide as like an effective 16.5mm. So again, the Viltrox 13mm will yield you about a 20mm effective, which is still pretty darn wide. So great option there, great option here. And it's super exciting that these very affordable, high quality lenses are becoming available, because the fact that this has a manual aperture, the function button on there, the click declick, I mean, all these features are like pretty advanced. Also, the build quality, like metal, rubber gasket, so forth. So again, at the end of the day, very impressed with this lens. And for somebody like me, this is perfect for when I'm going into like doing mountain bike videos and stuff, because, you know, God forbid I do damage something. It's just a much more affordable option. So I'm not so worried about like a rock kicking up and like hitting the lens, you know what I mean? Things like that factor in when it comes to certain environments. And that's where I particularly like this. Last time I went out and mountain biked, I brought the Viltrox, and it was much larger, much heavier, and not as wide. So if I was doing 4K 60 or 4K 120, it crops in quite a bit on this camera. And the 11mm gives you more, you know, leeway for when it crops in. You still get that fairly wide angle view, you know what I mean? Plus, it was much easier to carry the 11mm lens versus the 13mm when I was mountain biking. So it's just food for thought, guys, when it comes into optics. We have so many options for lenses these days when it comes to the Sony E-mount camera system that it's like kind of overwhelming to some degree. But when it comes to budget lenses that actually perform, this one, in my opinion, hits it out of the park. For the money, very impressive. Again, the biggest negative, I would say, was that fringing that we saw in some of the real world stuff. But because that's so easily correctable in Lightroom, it's not that big of a deal. And the other thing is the distortion. But in the real world, as long as you're not shooting architecture with perfectly straight lines and stuff, you don't even really notice it. So it is what it is, guys. All right, that about wraps up this video. I really hope you guys got what you were looking for. And if you could do me a favor, give me a thumbs up if you found this video useful. And it would be super cool if you subscribed as well. All right, guys, I'll catch up with you next time. Take care. Links below in the description area.